This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Joyce Davis. I am PennLive's outreach and opinion editor, and this is Battleground PA. Today we are, I guess, quite blessed to have with us two brilliant men. I was going to say young men, but Jeffrey, it's okay. Jeffrey Lord is here. He's well known and well experienced. He's got a lot of history he brings us. Age brings wisdom, right, Jeffrey?
That's right. I'm only 10.
There you go. There you go. But Jeffrey, it's always good to have you here. And John Cole, who is actually a reporter for the Capital Star and just steeped in political news for us today. So I'm just glad everybody's here. We miss Rajette Harris, but she'll be back with us soon. So let's get started. You've got some news, John. It looks like Kamala Harris was in town for a little while, or at least in our neck of the woods. What was she here for?
That's correct. So yesterday, President Joe Biden announced his latest plan to cancel student loan debt for a certain amount of Americans. He made the formal announcement in Wisconsin yesterday, and Vice President Harris was in Philadelphia for a roundtable discussion with Congressman Dwight Evans, who represents Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district, which is parts of Philadelphia. And there were three people there that explained their own experience with already having their student loan debt canceled. There was a school teacher from Philadelphia, a nurse at a school in Philadelphia, and a social worker explaining their personal experience about already having their student loan debt forgiven earlier in the Biden administration. So this latest plan, according to the Biden administration, if approved, again, if not shot down by the courts, and we will see that play out. But this new relief program would eliminate accrued interest for 23 million borrowers, cancel the full amount of student debt for over 4 million borrowers, and provide more than 10 million borrowers with at least $5,000 in debt relief or more. So this is the latest plan from the Biden administration. I suppose the big question is, though, will this get across the finish line? Because we know previous efforts made by the Biden administration were shot down in the U.S. Supreme Court. But worth noting that they did stress yesterday, even though one of their previous plan was shot down in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Biden-Harris administration has already approved up to $146 billion in student debt relief for 4 million Americans. And in PA specifically, that would be 101,550 borrowers. So I guess the big question is, though, again, yesterday they had a roundtable discussing this new proposal. Remains to be seen if this cross the finish line.
You know that you wouldn't automatically say, right? You could admit that those are voters for Biden who got their debt relief, but it's just weird. I mean, Jeffrey, I know there are people, especially in the Republican Party in New York, who really don't agree with this, right? I mean, I know you agree that it's a crime what we've done to young people. But you don't necessarily think the government should bail them out. Is that correct, Jeffrey? I mean, is that the Republican stance generally?
Well, I just think this is such a blatant thing. Now, that said, maybe it'll work. But I think I'm correct that I've seen polls that he is trailing with young people. So I understand why he's doing it. I mean, it is a blatant political ploy. The thing that I find interesting that probably will go absolutely nowhere is the issue of why do kids need that much money to go to college in the first place?
Yes, Jeffrey.
Preach,
as they say.
The answer to that is not going to be explored by Joe Biden, because that would mean marauding into academia and demanding that colleges charge less, which is to say maybe not pay their faculty and all of those liberals in running colleges as much money as they're getting. But that's what
now, Jeffrey, there are conservatives in college too. It's not just only liberals aren't the only educated.
Well,
see,
Joyce, in 1972, when George McGovern was the Democratic nominee for president, running against President Nixon, I was the head of college Republicans at Franklin and Marshall College, a student body of about 2,000. There were 5 of us for Nixon.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago. Things have changed. John, let me pull you in again. Can you tell us why? I mean, what's different this time? I mean, what is it what's the strategy that he's using this time to get some debt relief? Because I honestly think young people need some. I mean, I think we all need it because the economy is going to suffer when people can't buy houses, when they can't do the stuff because they're saddled with debt. But what's different about this idea?
Well, I think they're a little more optimistic 'cause maybe this, I don't want to say it's not as ambitious. I don't want to go as far to say that. But again, I think there was not as much as the previous announcement. So I think they're hoping that this may be able to get across the finish line. But again, this is one of those things where
Yeah.
I think there are a good amount of young Americans in the country that, and actually, might I add, it's not just young Americans because those who were discussing in this roundtable discussion yesterday with the vice president, and I was in the room for it, all 3 women who discussed having their student loan debt relief forgiven already. One of them said she's been paying it for 20 plus years. She has a daughter in college also pursuing education at this time. So it's kind of interesting that I know, to Jeffrey's point, how maybe it can be viewed to a certain degree as a move politically to boost, support among younger voters. But it's interesting because college debt is not something that's just impacting just people in their 20s and 30s now. I mean, this is something where we've seen people for decades paying the student loan debt. So it's kind of fascinating that it's not purely just, your 21-year-old who isn't sure, or the person fresh out of college who might not vote for Biden. There are people that were on this panel yesterday that said their kids are now in college and they're talking about having their debt relief.
Well, can you imagine if your kids in college, they're going to have to pay their debt. You're paying your debt. You're trying to help them pay their debt. I mean, it's a mess. It's all about college debt.
But
And
Joyce,
I think that's a winning issue, frankly. You know why? But you know why? Because there's another podcast that young people are doing called Next Gen PA, and John, you've been on that. And let me tell you, this is a real issue for young people, even those headed to college. It's a huge issue. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Sorry.
Well, I do want to take note that there has been no attempt made to pay me back for my college loan.
That's because you're rich, Jeffrey. They don't have to pay you back. You're doing okay.
Right.
You got rich friends for sure.
But one thing
I know.
Jeffrey,
with her.
One thing I've noticed, Jeffrey, and some Republicans have, pushed back on the Biden administration moves for this. And it is interesting. I kind of wonder how this will play electorally in the sense of some Republicans I've seen have made the case that why should those who have some of these blue collar jobs that didn't require college degrees, in essence, in their mind, foot the bill for those who have that debt. So it is fascinating because I'm curious about, to those, let's say there are young voters that might be straddled with lots of college debt, and I certainly understand that. I'm a recent college graduate as well. So I wonder, you might have some of them that certainly endorse this plan by the Biden administration, but I do wonder if there are those young voters or voters across the board who maybe didn't go to college and maybe they feel some type of way about having that, because maybe they would think, where's my piece of the pie too? And again, I'm just wondering, I think that's something that's really fascinating.
That's a good point, because the other point is, and I work with young people a lot, especially we have a summer internship program. We bring in high school and college students. And let me tell you, unfortunately, I have heard many students talk about using their student loans for European semesters abroad. I mean, a good education, I'm all for travel because I think it's the best education to get out and see the world. But if you're borrowing money on your future to be able to spend the summer in Venice, there you go. I mean, there needs to be more restrictions, Jeffrey, on just how these loans can be used. Maybe they should only be used purely for that in school learning or so, as opposed to traveling.
That's possible. But one of the other things that I think is very interesting, and frankly, I hadn't even thought of this until, of all people, Governor Shapiro made this.
A pretty smart guy, but go ahead. I don't know why you.
Well, what he was saying was, you don't need a college education to work in my administration, which led to the larger question of, does everybody have to have a college education in the first place? I thought, well, good question.
Yep. Yeah, no, it is a good question because unfortunately, and we're going to move on, but unfortunately, we've sold a bill of goods that you're not going to make it in the world if you don't have a college education. And we all know that's just not true. We know
Oh,
there
and
are a
I
lot of
think,
folks.
Joyce, in defense of those who did it, I think of my own parents, but my own parents weren't alone in this. I do think that the Great Depression, as it were, that not as it were, the Great Depression, which deprived so many Americans of so much, set set a whole generation of people, my parents' generation, on a path where they were determined that their children were
Yes.
not going to have the disadvantages that they had, and therefore a college education became sort of the class A symbol of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. You're right. To make sure they didn't suffer like that, and that's especially true with Black families, people from who are disenfranchised. They want to make sure you've got the
Yes.
tools you need to succeed. But anyway, well, there's a whole lot more we could talk about this because it's a big issue. But let's move on. Let's talk a little bit. I want to, since we've got John here, I want him to pull us in on how things are going in all these races. Of course, the big one for many people is District 10. How is that looking as you look around? I mean, we yet to hear from Perry at any of the campaign forums, but we've heard from all the rest. What's it looking like, John?
And just one note on that, Joyce, you're right. So the 10th congressional district, located again in the Harrisburg region, all of Dauphin County, Cumberland, I believe parts of York as well. That is certainly one of the congressional races I would say keep an eye on. Congressman Scott Perry, again, a former chair of the House Freedom Caucus, conservative caucus in Congress, seeking another term. That district, since redistricting, again, it's an area that I think it's trending a bit blue. We'll see how blue is still a Republican voter advantage there. But there are 6 Democrats attempting to unseat him. Interesting race going on. And by the way, for our listeners and those watching on YouTube, keep an eye. There will be this week, there is the pre-primary congressional filing for how much money they're raising. So we'll see how much they have in the bank. So that is one thing that I will be doing reporting on. So be sure to check out the Pennsylvania Capital Star for that. But yeah,
We will.
up to this point, though, Mike O'Brien, who is a veteran, and Janelle Stelson, a former anchor at WGAL, they've raised the most money in the race. Now, to be clear, money does not mean they're going to win. And we've not seen widespread polling. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where but I'm saying at least on the money side, they have a lot of money and they're on the airwaves, which I think to get your message out to voters, we've seen O'Brien ads and we've seen Stelson ads. We'll see if some of the other candidates also get on television. And there's certainly time to, but with just less than 2 weeks now until the primary, time is of the essence. So all these candidates are making their last second pushes to
And
get.
people like me have already voted. We've already got it in there. It's done. It's a done deal. So
And Joyce, that's actually a great point to mention. There are those who've already voted by mail. So some of those TV ads, let's say you're a candidate who's just getting on TV now, there are some who already cast their ballot. But that will be a competitive race. And actually, I did see Congressman Scott Perry speak this past weekend at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. I saw Jeffrey there as well. And one thing that was very, very interesting, and Jeffrey, when I was on Joyce and Jeffrey, I was on with you last, I think, a month ago. I was talking to you about mail-in ballots. And I can tell you, Jeffrey, Joyce, my biggest takeaway from covering Pennsylvania Leadership Conference this past weekend, and again, this is a conservative grassroots conference. This is Pennsylvania's version of CPAC.
all right.
It is. And I'll tell you, Scott Perry was on there telling people to vote by mail. You had David McCormick telling people to vote by mail. Dan Muser, a congressman, telling people to vote by mail. You had different panels discussing the need for Republicans to vote by mail because Democrats have such a large advantage with this that they are sounding the alarm. And I just want to say, I talked about it last time. I can tell you this is amongst the grassroots. The conservative wing of the party is even saying they got to get their act together on this.
They've got religion, and they're smart to do so because I mean, Jeffrey, I mean, why handicap yourself, right? I mean, they continue to fight this stuff, but it's going to help older people, older Republicans be able to simply put their little ballot in the mail, right? And what if it's bad weather? So I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But Jeffrey, tell us what else happened at that convention.
Well, let me start with after that. Just last night, I was at an event for Scott Perry, right here in Cumberland County, and It was extremely well attended, very enthusiastic, lots of support. I mean, this is not going to be a cakewalk for whoever winds up as a Democratic opponent here, because it's very clear to me from that, and also the reception he received at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, which was from people who were far beyond the boundaries of the 10th district. So um, I think he is well on his way. You know, it's just too soon.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
we're talking Congress or any other race.
But he's not, you don't think he's running scared right about now. You think he's still
No,
confident,
no.
right?
And you know, I always judge a candidate by the kind of support they get and talking to people and all this. And I can tell you, his supporters last night and over the weekend were very, very enthusiastic. They
Mhm.
are really revved up. I think that also is going to affect the presidential race here because and I think John would probably agree that it was very enthusiastic at the PLC when Donald Trump was mentioned. You know, I mean, as he says, as John says, this is the Pennsylvania version of CPAC.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
I did a piece on it for the American Spectator, and you know, it was founded in 1989 by the late Fred Anton, who was president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association.
Mhm.
And wow, this thing has really, really taken
Taken
off.
off, huh?
It
Ah,
was not just presidential candidates, but we had uh, Dave Sunday and Craig Williams, the Republican candidates for Attorney General. We had Dave McCormick, as mentioned. It was extremely well attended by candidates
yeah.
for
Yeah.
all the different offices. Stacey Garrity running for treasurer and that sort of thing. So
Sounds interesting. Wish I could have been there, but anyway, John, let me ask you this too. Let's move on because he mentioned the Attorney General's race. He mentioned, Casey and McCormick. Tell us where they. Let's start with the Attorney General's race. As you look at that, what do you see?
So this is an open seat. And
Yes.
actually, amongst there's 3 row offices. And for those who aren't familiar, it's Auditor General, Treasurer, and Attorney General. And there's U.S.
Yep.
Senate. So to those voters in Pennsylvania, you will be able to vote on that in the primary, as long as you're registered Democrat or Republican. And the general, doesn't matter your party registration, you can vote on that as it is. Attorney General is the only one that is an open seat. There's no incumbent seeking re-election. So that's the one where a lot of people are keeping an eye on. Also, because the stakes of Attorney General, as we've joked in previous podcasts, of AG meeting almost governor, as 2 of the 3 previous governors were Attorney Generals once upon a time, Josh Shapiro and Tom Corbett.
Yeah.
On the Republican side, you have Dave Sunday, who is a York County District Attorney, and Craig Williams, who's a state representative representing parts of Delaware County and Chester County. Again, on policy, they're not that far apart. It's just more so an issue of who, again, quote, is the real Republican, real conservative in the race. Sunday has the endorsement of the Pennsylvania Republican Party and the Republican Attorneys General's Association. Williams has the support of some fellow colleagues in the state house. However, Williams has been very clear, and he's made this jab at Sunday many a times, that Sunday's not a lifelong Republican. He was once upon a time a registered Democrat. So
Shudder, shake.
he's made that case on the trail,
Right,
and
right.
Sunday has combated that by saying, hey, the PAGOP, the state party, is backing me. So are the Republican attorney generals. And I think Treasurer Stacey Garrity and some others. So he's making.
Well, on the other side, that same criticism has come out about Janelle Stelson, that she hasn't always been she's not even living in the district, that kind of thing. So those attacks are going to come. Yeah.
You're right.
Just one of the things, though, that I think the row offices, as they're called, are relatively obscure to most voters. And I suspect if you took a poll today, that most voters would not be able to tell you who either of the Republican candidates for Attorney General are. So correspondingly, I think that cuts in favor of Sunday, precisely because he's been endorsed by the Pennsylvania State Republican Party and the AG's Association. In other words, those people who are making an effort to know.
Yeah. On the other side, though, De Pasquale's name is pretty well known in the Democrat side.
Yes.
It's interesting because there's 5 Democrats running on that side. And another thing to keep in mind in a crowded race, sometimes, believe it or not, in Pennsylvania, geography can play into this.
Oh,
Where,
yeah,
it's
very
depending
much.
when you hail from a certain part of the state, you're expected to get the vote from there. And most of the candidates for attorney general are based out of the Southeast. You have State Representative Jared Solomon, a Democrat who represents parts of Northeast Philly. Joe Kahn, a former Bucks County solicitor, so that's also in the Southeast. You have Keir Bradford Gray, former public defender in Philadelphia, and I think she has experience in Montgomery County as well, if I'm not mistaken. You have Jack Stolzheimer, who's the district attorney in Delaware County, also in the Philadelphia area. And then you have Eugene DePasquale, again, who was the former two-term state auditor general. He's actually, I think he's living out west now. He was, years ago, he was a state rep, I believe, in York County. And now I think he grew up in Western PA. So it'll be interesting to see that play out. Solomon had a pretty good cash advantage, and I can at least speak from the Philadelphia market, living in Philly. Solomon and Stolzheimer are on TV with ads. Again, we will see how much that plays into it. But to Jeffrey's point, in these rural offices where many voters admittedly don't know a lot about the candidates, even though DePasquale has the advantage of being a two-term statewide official already, maybe these television ads can be effective, because I think a lot of these people probably don't, a lot of voters at large, beyond those who are really keyed in, probably don't know a lot about it. So,
but here's the key. Here's the problem. I think people, they have to get with the new times. I mean, again, we mentioned that a percentage of people have already voted. And you've got it. You can't wait. They probably think we can wait till that last week. But you're missing, thousands of people. They've got to get a new timetable here. A new timetable in politics is essential if you're going to really be effective, I think.
and
The
that's
thing that
interesting.
bothers me about mail-in ballots, and you saw this at play in the Fetterman race, is that people were voting well ahead of the election, and then they had that famous debate with Fetterman and Dr. Oz, and the thinking in the day was that Dr. Oz did very well in that. But to what point, if all these thousands of people had already voted before they saw the debate? That's what I think the problem is that something can happen that could change your vote if you voted in September. And I that's what makes me skeptical of all this.
That's true, but I still think there's I'm all for mail-in, but I always have been. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, to the point of, again, mail-in ballot, again, that was mail-in voting is truly, again, my big takeaway from, again, the grassroots conservative folk. And again, Jeffrey was there. I was there. They were telling people, even Jeffrey, even if you have made your reservations, and might I add, McCormick, Perry, Muser, they all kind of shared a similar message. The words were from Dave McCormick said, quote, Act 77, which is the mail-in voting law that approved, mail-in voting in Pennsylvania. McCormick said, quote, it's not his cup of tea. Perry said, in his words, that's what he said, it's not his cup of tea. Right. And Perry said, I didn't make the rules, but they are what they are. But I mean, McCormick had some strong words, in my opinion. He said, if we don't embrace mail-in voting, we're going to lose. Like he said, so I mean, look, there's a real stark difference there, where if they don't make up that difference, it could be, play.
You're leaving money on the table. You're leaving money on the table.
Yeah. I'm going to keep an eye on this weekend. Former President Trump is going to be in Pennsylvania once again.
Oh, yes, he is.
On Saturday, I'll be in attendance. He has a rally scheduled in the Lehigh Valley. It's another battleground area of the state. Speaking of which, months later, keep an eye on the 7th Congressional District. I
don't think Jeffrey's going to go to that event in Lehigh. Are you, Jeffrey? You're going to
No, although, I went to high school in Allentown for my last 2 years of high school, to my beloved Deer High School. But no, I am not going to go.
I thought sure you'd be there. Oh, goodness.
As a matter of fact, I just heard from who just yesterday, as a matter of fact. So he's got my blessing. He knows it.
I hope he knows how well you're representing him on Battleground PA. So, but let's talk a little bit before we go back to all of Trump's trials. Let's talk a little bit about this the McCormick and you know and it's Casey and all of that. He did come to visit and speak to PennLive's editorial board just as a kind of I'm here, don't forget
Senator
me.
Casey.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and he came to talk to us, and it's really pushing this whole thing about greed, inflation, and greedflation, and all of that, which frankly is another good issue because people are looking at these rising prices and wondering who's to blame. And if you can blame somebody other than Biden, that's a good thing. But so talk a little bit about that, John, as you see it shaping up.
Sure. So again, as Senator Casey seeks a fourth term in the U.S.
Yeah,
Senate, he's talked about quote greedflation and also quote shrinkflation
yeah.
at
Oh
length.
yes.
And I can tell you, I was in last week. Senator Casey had a roundtable discussion with the FTC chair, Khan, in Philadelphia. A roundtable discussion with some people from Philadelphia discussing how inflation has impacted their finances. The case, Senator Casey is making the case that our corporations or companies are to blame. They are jacking up prices in, past the rate of inflation, and he is pinning the blame on them. McCormick has combated that, saying the real issue at hand in his mind is the Biden administration's policies leading to the inflation itself. But we're seeing that play out as a key campaign issue because Casey's talked about it at length across the whole state. And get this, at this point in time, Senator Casey, as we're speaking, has 2 TV ads up thus far, and McCormick has 2 ads up as well. One of the ads Casey has is about greedflation. So Casey's making it a key message in his campaign thus far, and I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. It's certainly one of the pillars, I think, of his campaign to this point in time.
Jeffrey, I think it's a smart thing to do because otherwise you're just going to keep getting battered for inflation. At least now you have an argument to come back to it, right? I mean, better than
Well,
sitting there getting beaten up.
as the color of my hair indicates, I've been around the block and I've heard this argument many, 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 many times. I think back to when I was in high school in 1966, and the Great Society, LBJ's Great Society, and he'd been elected in a landslide in 1964, and he spends all this money. By 1966, inflation was just raging, and that became an issue for Republican candidates all across the country. And they did indeed win big time in those elections. They elected a former actor governor of California, as I distinctly recall.
Yes.
He was not, and Mitt Romney's father was elected governor of Michigan. But the inflation was the key.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's going to be a key issue. It clearly is a key issue. People are talking all the time about the grocery prices, but again, if you can divert it from just being the problem of the president to the problem of the businesses, that at least gives you an argument. Otherwise, you don't have an argument. But let's move on because we're almost out of time. And one of the final things we have to talk about is at least I mean, former President Trump is coming to the Lehigh Valley, so we'll be here and we'll be watching that, and at least John will be there, if not. But he still is facing all of this legal stuff that seems to me to be simply occupying most of his energy and time. Jeffrey, fill us in on how do you think he's doing with combating all of this?
I think he's doing amazingly well. I mean, I truly am surprised. There's really no precedent for this.
No,
Uh,
there isn't.
but as we've seen, the more these people pile on, every time there's an indictment, his poll numbers go up. And I think what this is getting at here is that the American people have gotten the drift that he's being politically persecuted with this lawfare business because Democrats don't like him. And whether it's the Biden Justice Department or some local Democratic prosecutor somewhere going after him, to use the law to go after and suppress a candidate that is in the political opposition is drawing, I think, a significant backlash that winds up ironically helping Donald Trump. So
Well, I think that's a good opinion, and you're definitely a Trump supporter, but there are people who don't really see it that way. They see it another way completely, that we've got to protect this democracy and that this is, and I'll tell you, I did a great decisions discussion with an expert on national security, and one of the biggest issues that he pointed out that the country is facing is a lack of trust in our institutions. And all of this is simply, I mean, on both sides, because if you're looking at it as from the liberal or Democratic side, you're seeing what mess, what corruption, what squalor, right? That's what you're seeing. On the other side, you're saying, look at they're coming after the good guys. How so? I mean, none of that is helping to instill trust in the American system or in American institutions. We're all going to suffer for that. I could be wrong, but all good Americans are going to suffer until we join hands and say, yes, this is a good country. We've got good people working, and we trust our courts. We trust our elected officials. And it's going to take the elected officials being worthy of that trust.
Well,
Okay,
Joyce,
I'm wrong, Jeffrey. Go ahead. I'm wrong. I know.
Joyce, not to disillusion you, but one of the
I'm
words you don't,
naive, I know.
one of the words you do not hear very often in American politics is kumbaya. And
You hear it from me, Jeffrey. You hear it from me. I reached out my hand and kumbaya. John, any other final words for you? We got to get out of here.
It really does take something like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or what have you. Then you really do see it.
Or a
And
solar
American
eclipse.
flags
That's what
sprout
we're
all
hoping.
over the place. And, you know, I'll never forget post 9/11 when President George W. Bush went to Yankee Stadium to throw out the first ball in whatever the World Series or what have you. Well, all of Yankee Stadium, which is to say in seriously blue New York, rose to their feet and cheered him.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
you know,
we
so
can't come together.
it does happen, but you know, these are normal times, and so you're just going to have normal politics here.
Well, I think actually these are abnormal times and we've got abnormal politics. But with that, I do have to end it. I take my prerogative as a moderator to say, see y'all later. Okay. See you next week. Bye
All
bye,
right,
everybody.
bye
Thanks,
bye.
John, for being here. Bye bye.
Thank you.